Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to take a look at the philosopher John Rawls and his arguments for his particular version of distributive justice. So let's start off here by taking a look at just a quick bio of John Rawls. His dates are 1921 to 2002, so contemporary philosopher. He was an influential American political philosopher, best known for his work in moral and political theory, especially his concept of justice as fairness. And that's what we're going to try to explore over the next few slides. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, Rawls served in World War II before earning his PhD from Princeton University. He later taught at several major universities, most notably Harvard. And we're going to find out that one of his colleagues at Harvard at one point, a guy named Robert Nozick, he is going to have a view that's sort of the antithesis of Rawls's theory, and so we'll see him as a critic eventually, and then see how he tries to put bumps in the road here for Rawls. So his landmark book, A Theory of Justice, in 1971 introduced the ideas of the original position and the veil of ignorance as a way to imagine a just society. In it, Rawls argued for two key principles of justice, focused on equal liberty and fair distribution of opportunities and resources. His later works included political liberalism, including political liberalism. In 1993, refined these ideas in response to critiques. Rawls's theories have had a profound impact on modern political thought, influencing debates on democracy, rights, and fairness across philosophy, law, and public policy. Okay, so before we look at Rawls's theory specifically, let's just try to get a basic understanding of the different ways that we might think about the concept of justice. Now, generally, justice in sort of a generic definitional sense is just giving someone their due, something they deserve. And so there are different ways you can think of giving someone what they deserve or giving their due. And so let's look at some different ways that we might think about that. So here are three different types of justice. Now, what we're going to be concerned with here throughout this lecture is primarily distributive justice. And so distributive justice is concerned with the fair distribution of resources, wealth, opportunities, and responsibilities in society. And that's what Rawls is going to try to tackle here. He's going to try to develop a theory of justice that handles those sorts of things: resources, wealth, opportunities, and responsibilities. Basically, the benefits and burdens of society and how they should be distributed in a fair way. So key question, who gets what and why? That's what we're trying to answer when we're exploring questions within the realm of distributive justice. And then examples would be things like, where you would apply this in the real world would be welfare programs, taxation, and access to education. Now, beyond distributive justice, there are other forms of justice, so let's take a look at those. That'll help us have a clearer understanding of where the boundaries of distributive justice are versus the other types. So you have procedural justice. It focuses on the fairness of the processes and rules by which decisions are made. So the key question here is, were the rules followed fairly? And obviously questions like that pop up in society quite often. So examples where you would see this in the real world are fair trials, transparent decision making, and due process in various contexts like the workplace or the legal environment and so on. So then we have retributive justice, and what that refers to is the act of retribution. So it's concerned, this type of justice is concerned with punishment for wrongdoing based on the idea of that people should get what they deserve. The key question, how should wrongdoers be punished? And examples of that in the real world would be things like criminal sentencing and justice for victims. And so retributive justice is generally within the context of consequences within the legal system, so incarceration and things like that. Okay, and then we have restorative justice here. It focuses on repairing the harm caused by wrongdoers through reconciliation and making amends. So key questions you'd explore there would be how can the harm be repaired, whatever the harm was in that case. So examples of that in the real world would be things like victim offender mediation, community service, apologies, and reparations. You're trying to restore a balance of fairness as a result of some wrongdoing. Okay, and then there's social justice. It's a broader concept that emphasizes equality and human rights, aiming to address systematic inequalities related to race, gender, class, and so on. Key questions in the real world would be things like, are societal structures fair and inclusive? And then when you applied it, you have things like anti-discrimination laws, civil rights movements, and so on. Probably when most people think about justice in just everyday discourse, probably they're thinking about social justice. And we're going to find that when we talk about distributive justice here, the way Rawls portrays it, it certainly will have implications for social justice. Distribution, how one distributes the burdens and benefits of society can have significant implications for the way social justice is distributed in a society. And then finally here we have commutative justice. This deals with fairness in agreements and exchanges between individuals or private parties. The key question, were the terms of exchange fair? So real world examples would be things like contracts, business transactions, and compensation. Are the contracts of the society structured in a way that they're fair to both parties? And same thing with basic business transactions, and then compensation for working or selling something to someone else, goods and services, things like that. Okay, so keep those in mind when you're thinking about the idea of justice here, and our primary focus, like I said, is distributive justice, basically the idea of how burdens and benefits in society should be distributed. Okay, so here's where Rawls starts. This is the beginning of his argument for his position on distributive justice, and he calls it the original position. The original position is a hypothetical situation. It's just a thought experiment. We're imagining a scenario. Of course, it never really happened this way. Rawls is not arguing that this is how things started. He's saying if you're creating a system of justice, then this is the kind of thought process you would want to engage in if your goal is to actually create a completely fair system of distributive justice. So it's a hypothetical situation where rational individuals come together to choose the fundamental principles that will govern the basic structure of their society. So to ensure fairness, these individuals are placed behind what Rawls calls a veil of ignorance. So what that means is certain knowledge of certain things is inaccessible to them, and the knowledge things, the beliefs that are inaccessible to them, are things that have a significant impact on how one might want to construct a theory of justice. So let's look at these, and then we'll see what his goal here was with this move. So the veil of ignorance, when you're behind the veil of ignorance, individuals will not know, they have no knowledge of their social status, their wealth or class, race or gender, their intelligence or talents, their religion or moral values, or their plans or goals, right? They're basically just in a neutral starting point. And the reason he does this is because if you have knowledge of these kinds of things, if your goal is to create a system of distributive justice for society that's fair, and you have knowledge of your social status, are you very influential in society? Are you somewhere on the bottom and nobody really pays attention to you? Do you have a lot of money or not very much money at all? Are you white? Are you black? Are you Asian? Are you extremely intelligent or talented at some particular skill that might you might be able to use it to gain influence and status? Are you part of a religion that is dominant in that particular culture? And so on, right? So the idea is that if you have knowledge of those kinds of things, then you would likely pick rules in society that would lead to benefit you, right? People are, on Rawls's view, naturally biased towards self-preservation themselves, and so even if they're trying as hard as they possibly can, they would probably, in picking the appropriate rules of a justice system, if they had access to these kinds of things, they would likely build a system that has biases towards them. And so Rawls's goal here is to construct a scenario where we would create a completely unbiased and fair system of distributive justice. So what his argument is that this ignorance of these particular things ensures that they cannot create biased rules to favor their own position, since they don't know where they'll end up in the real society. So what Rawls argues here is that what any rational being would do in these circumstances, if they're in the original position and they're behind this veil of ignorance, is that they would assume worst case scenario, right? Virtually everyone would assume, just to be safe, that they're low in social status, they're low in wealth, they are in the worst case scenario in terms of race and gender. They're not particularly intelligent or talented in any particular area. They are in a religious minority, and their plans or goals would not be considered what would be mainstream in that particular society. So you would assume worst case scenario if you don't know where you're going to end up, because it would be very risky to assume that you're on the other side of the spectrum, that you're high in social class, you have a lot of wealth, and so on. Because if you were wrong about that, then you would construct a system of justice that would work against you. But on the other hand, if you assume that you're low in all of these areas, you're on the side that would put you at risk, then it would be to your advantage to construct a system that would protect everyone. Not just one that would protect you with your particular position in society. So that's how Rawls thinks he can generate a fair system out of this veil of ignorance move, because out of just our rational capacities and self-preservation, we would choose a system with the most protections possible. And so what Rawls thinks we would end up with is two principles of justice. And so he calls those the liberty principle and the difference principle and the fair equality of opportunity. Those two are combined to form principle number 2. So let's go through these and make sure we understand what he's doing. So the liberty principle, also called the first principle of justice, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others. So that means that you would have as much freedom as you possibly could imagine, as long as those freedoms didn't interfere with anyone else's freedom. So what Rawls is saying is, behind the veil of ignorance, everyone would want as much freedom as possible because they don't know whether they would have that freedom available to them because of their wealth or their status or their race or their gender and so on. So everybody would start with the most extensive basic liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others. So this means that everyone should have the same basic freedoms such as freedom of speech and assembly, freedom of conscience and religion, the right to vote and run for office, freedom of thought, the right to personal property, and freedom from arbitrary arrest. And so you'll see that his first principle, the liberty principle, ends up generating the kinds of freedoms that we would get from something like the U.S. Constitution. Very, very similar way of thinking about basic liberties. Okay, so that seems pretty straightforward for anyone thinking about this in the way that Rawls does, imagining that we're in this original position behind the veil of ignorance. Now, the difference principle and the fair equality of opportunity concept, those are a little harder to grapple with what he's doing here. So in principle 2, he says the difference principle and the fair equality of opportunity combined is the second principle of justice, of course. The idea is that social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are A, to the greatest benefit of the least advantage, that's what he calls the difference principle, and to B, attached to, sorry, I added an extra B there that I see now, attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. So what's he thinking here? He's saying, look, if you're behind this veil of ignorance and you're assuming that you could be at the bottom of the society in terms of your social status and your wealth and so on, then what you would want in order to balance things out is that anytime you have social and economic inequalities, you would want them structured in such a way that they would benefit you because you are the person who is least advantaged in that society. If you structure them the other way, then you could never take yourself from that lower position in society and move to a more advantaged position. And then, of course, you would want those opportunities to be attached to offices and positions that were accessible to all under a situation of fair and equal opportunity, right? So that way you would have a fair shot at it. So what Rawls says is that these are the two principles that would result from any rational being putting themselves in the original position behind the veil of ignorance. And on his view, these would be the only principles that would be fair when it comes to trying to determine the benefits and burdens of each individual in society. Okay, so that's how Rawls gets to his theory of distributive justice. Now, the question here is there an issue for it? Of course there is. There's always an issue in philosophy when it comes to discussions like this. So Rawls has a critic in the form of the philosopher Robert Nozick. And so Nozick has a number of arguments here, many of which are more complex than we need to get into for a critique of Rawls at this point. So we're going to take a look at one of Nozick's critique of Rawls's theory of justice that's pretty simple and straightforward here. So first thing to understand Nozick's critique is, and by the way, just a quick bio on Nozick. He was an American philosopher in the 20th century, and he spent part of his working life at Harvard and then at UCLA, if I remember correctly. And he was a colleague of Rawls, and so they were working together in the same philosophy department, but they ended up on two different sides of the debate when it came to the concept of justice. So what we need to keep in mind here when understanding Nozick's critique is that what would happen is if we accept Rawls's theory of distributive justice, then it would essentially structure society in such a way that there would be a redistribution of wealth, right? In other words, because you want to structure the social and economic inequalities to where they benefit the least advantaged, if somebody were to have access by their own workings or through just pure luck, they have access to more resources and more income, then that income, as a result of Rawls's theory of justice, would have to be at least partially redistributed to the rest of society. And that's what we see, for example, in like say the tax system in the United States. You have people at different income levels paying different tax rates, and the higher your income, the higher your tax rate. So that's related to this idea that you, in order to keep things fair in a society, you have to sort of redistribute the wealth at certain levels. Now, obviously, other countries in the world are more aggressive when it comes to the redistribution of wealth. The tax rates may be higher, for example, in places like Europe than the United States, but most societies have some kind of redistribution because there's some reasoning coming into play here very similar to what Rawls is arguing for in his second principle of justice. But what Nozick's concern here is whether that's actually fair. Is it fair to redistribute the wealth of someone if they earned it, and they earned it in a way that didn't harm anyone else, in that process and so forth? The question that Nozick is asking, is that fair? So he has this thought experiment. He raises a concern about fairness in taxation and lifestyle choices. He argues that people with materialistic preferences, like someone who might want to own a yacht, a really expensive boat basically, or an expensive car, because of this redistribution of wealth, they are unfairly burdened by having to work longer and pay more taxes than those with simpler, less costly tastes. So let's say you're comparing two people. You have somebody who really loves yachts, and you have somebody who just really is satisfied with life by watching sunsets. They don't care about owning a yacht or an expensive car. In the Rawlsian model of justice, since wealth ends up being redistributed, the person who buys the yacht would have to work more hours in order to make enough money to purchase the yacht, because part of their wealth, a larger chunk of their wealth, in fact, is being redistributed to people who are not in such a positive position financially. So that means just because of the taste preference of that individual, the person who just happens to like yachts, that's just one of their aesthetic preferences, that's what they like, it makes them feel good, they end up being burdened with more work in that society. And so even if they both contribute equally to society, the person who's the yacht lover versus the sunset lover, they're both moral, they contribute equally in terms of how they benefit society. The materialistic person must labor more to afford their lifestyle and fulfill their tax obligations. And so what Nozick is asking here is that fair, right? Just because of their particular taste preferences, why are we biased toward the sunset lover, the person who has a lower tax burden versus the yacht lover? So Nozick questions why someone should be penalized for their personal preferences if they aren't harming others, so suggesting that such a system discriminates against certain ways of life. And so it's interesting that what Rawls was doing is trying to construct a system of justice that didn't discriminate, that was as fair as possible. And what Nozick has tried to do here is show that, in fact, you're going to have discrimination against individuals in that society that if they were to implement Rawls's theory of justice, and the discrimination moves in the other direction. Now, of course, there are responses. People might argue here, if the taxation burden is not such that it changes the lifestyle significantly of the individual who's the yacht lover, then it would seem to be fair to ask for some redistribution of wealth. But that's the question, where is the line where you would say that a redistribution of wealth is fair in a society where you're following Rawls's two principles of justice. Okay, so that should give us a basic understanding of the concept of justice in general, various types of justice, Rawls's argument for distributive justice, and then at least one of Nozick's critique of Rawls's theory. Okay, so I'll catch you on the next video, and as always, if you need any help or have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me.